You're in the right place, the Buildbettersd workshop. Thank you to everyone who has joined. I'm going to hand it over to Christian, who is going to kick us off today. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and give Christian the option.
Thanks, Paula. Share my screen now. This one. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Build Better San Diego workshop. My name is Christian Rodarte. I'm a consultant to the planning department for the city of San Diego on Build Better San Diego. Just wanted to go over some ground rules for today and inform you all that we have translation available for everybody. So there are, let's start with our Zoom. Make sure make sure you're all on mute and off camera at the moment, and please select your language of choice. You have to select one option. Debe seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. Tiene que elegir un idioma. As I mentioned, we do have translation available for you this evening. There are Spanish interpretation services available for tonight. Please select the language in which you attend the meeting by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom or the right of your screen. Every participant must select English or Spanish in order to fully participate in the meeting. If you wish to participate in English, but do not select English as your language of choice, then you will not hear interpretation into English of any comments made in Spanish. Now, if you're joining via the Zoom smartphone app, please select the language by clicking More or the three dots in the bottom right corner of the screen. Select Language Interpretation, then choose Spanish, then click Done. If you wish to hear only the interpreters, but not the original speakers, please be sure to click Mute Original Audio. Everyone must choose a language. Do not stay on the default off. Hay servicios de interpretación de español para la reunión de hoy. Por favor, elija el idioma en que desea participar en la reunión haciendo clic en el icono del globo terráqueo que aparece en el ángulo inferior de su pantalla. Todos los participantes deben elegir inglés o el español para participar plenamente en la reunión. Si está uniéndose a través de la aplicación Zoom para smartphone, seleccione su idioma haciendo clic en More, más, o entre los tres puntos en la esquina inferior derecha de la pantalla. Seleccione Language Interpretation, interpretación del idioma, luego elija Spanish y haga clic en Done, listo. Si desea escuchar solo a los intérpretes y no a los oradores originales, asegúrese de hacer clic en Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Todos deben elegir un idioma. No se quede en la posición apagado predeterminada. For tonight, our meeting agreements are as follows. Please be respectful in your discourse. Open dialogue means having an open mind. Facilitators may advance discussion to other topics, but that does not mean that your contributions aren't any less important. Please use the chat function for questions outside of specific Q&A time slots. You can also type in Spanish and it will be translated. Make sure to give space for others to speak, as many of us are still new to virtual learning environments. Por favor, sea respetuoso en su discurso. Diálogo abierto significa tener una mente abierta. Los facilitadores pueden avanzar la discusión a otros temas, pero eso no significa que las contribuciones no sean importantes. Utilice la función de chat para preguntas fuera de las franjas horarias específicas de preguntas y respuestas. También puede escribir en español y se traducirá. Asegúrese de dar espacio para que otros también hablen. Muchos de nosotros todavía somos nuevos a los entornos de aprendizaje virtual. Question and answers. We will be answering questions at the end of our presentation during the designated Q&A period. We will answer as many questions as possible within our allotted time frame. Preguntas y respuestas. Responderemos preguntas al final de nuestra presentación durante el periodo de preguntas y respuestas. Responderemos tantas preguntas como sean posible dentro de nuestro tiempo de la reunión asignado. how to use tonight's Zoom, cómo usar el Zoom. Please submit any questions during the presentation through the Q&A window if you wish to send your question anonymously. Mande sus preguntas durante la presentación por medio de la sección Q&A si quiere mandar sus preguntas de manera anónima. Comments can be submitted through the chat window. Pueden escribir sus comentarios en la ventana del chat. And during the discussion, if you would like to speak over audio, please raise your hand. Otherwise, questions and comments can be submitted through the Q&A window. Durante el debate, si desea participar de manera oral, por favor, levante la mano. De lo contrario, las preguntas y comentarios pueden presentarse a través de la ventana de preguntas y respuestas. And with that, I will hand it now over to City of San Diego Planning Director, Heidi Bungalow. Let me stop sharing so you can take over, Paula.
Thank you very much, Christian. Good evening again. My name is Heidi Von Blum. I am the Interim Planning Director in the city's Planning Department, and I want to thank each of you who are sharing your time with us this evening. We are very excited to have your input on our BuildBetterSD initiative, which at its core is a comprehensive modernization of how we plan for and fund infrastructure needed to serve our growing city. Public spaces like parks, libraries, streets, and plazas where we can play, connect with others, and learn are critical to what makes a city livable and enjoyable. And we want every community in our city to have these opportunities. But this is also about more than infrastructure alone. Infrastructure policy is not just about infrastructure. It is also climate policy and housing policy. And it is also a critical way to begin to address inequities in our city. We as a city have grown and changed over the decades. More of us live in urban areas and either do or want to travel by walking, rolling, biking, or taking transit. We have a housing crisis and are in desperate need of more homes in all of our communities. We are also more aware of how our lives impact our environment and climate. We are more mobile and more connected. Our lives are not confined to the community in which we reside. We visit friends, take our kids to school, work, volunteer, and play all across the city. And our desires and needs for public infrastructure and public spaces has changed along with all of this. Thank you again for joining us, learning with us, and sharing with us. With that, I will turn it over to Paola Boylan, one of our amazing city planners that I have the pleasure to work with.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Heidi, and hello, everyone. My name is Paola Boylan, Senior Planner with the Planning Department at the City of San Diego, working on BuildBetterSD. So let's dive into this presentation. Today's presentation will provide a brief overview of the history behind this initiative, the actions needed to make BuildBetterSD a reality, the timeline associated with the initiative, and ways to stay connected and updated so that you can continue to provide feedback as this initiative moves through the public process. After the presentation, as mentioned earlier, there will be a Q&A portion, so please make note of your questions, and we'll have time for this at the end of the presentation. We're looking forward to ongoing conversations with all of you. So what is BuildBetterSD? At its core, it's a citywide initiative to enable faster delivery of public spaces and infrastructure equitably and sustainably across San Diego. It modernizes how we plan for public infrastructure to ensure we plan for new development and infrastructure that meets the needs of today's world, today's housing, today's climate reality, and today's need to address long-standing inequities. There are four action items to BuildBetterSD, and you'll see this on your screen. It includes shifting to citywide development impact fees to focus on more efficient completion of infrastructure where it's needed the most, included in areas with the most development. The second action is amending the public facilities safety element of the city's general plan to align with the city's climate, equity, and housing goals. The third action item is reforming regional transportation funding to streamline housing and implement the climate action plan. And finally, amending the land development code to facilitate implementation of regulations. The history of development impact fees in the city has been ingrained for decades and was designed for the types of development we have seen in the past, which for a long while was primarily focused on developing more suburban communities on large undeveloped land. For these largely suburban developments, it is understood that all the new infrastructure was directly needed to serve new development. There was no existing development and therefore no other existing needs. Therefore, facility benefits assessments, FBAs, shown on the right side of the screen here, were charged to new development, were intended to pay 100% of the cost of those new facilities. However, in the city's urban areas, the city instead collected development impact fees, shown on the left side of the screen, that appropriately acknowledged that not all infrastructure needs in the community were attributable to new development. Therefore, at the time, the methodology for the development impact fees was designed to identify more limited infrastructure needs in the overall community. In all cases, whether it was called FBA or a DIF, the money was retained in the specific community in which it was collected, only to be used for a specified static list of projects. Over time, our development pattern has shifted towards urban infill development to align with the city's climate action plan. And there is an urgent need to reform how we envision infrastructure to serve our city to address inequities. To further compound the challenges the city's existing fee system, the amount of fees collected vary significantly by tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the community. Communities with lower fees have less money available to fund infrastructure, and communities with higher fees present obstacles to the provision of new development, including fair housing opportunities for people of all income levels in all of our communities. The current system has resulted in one city, but two realities. Across the city, we see disparities in our infrastructure, including our parks, our streets, where people ride their bikes and where people walk with their children and loved ones. BuildBettersD is a policy initiative focused on delivering these public facilities to people faster and more sustainably. The map on this slide shows how much investments specific to development impact fees vary from community to community. Communities that have seen over $100 million in investments are what were historically called FBA communities. And we see a stark contrast between this level of investment, especially when compared to the city's historically underserved communities with lower fees. And these issues are not just isolated to underserved communities, but to all of us. There is currently around $220 million in development impact fees spread across 40 different community funds. Some communities have fund balances as low as $27,000, while others have balances as high as $40 million. Collecting money for infrastructure is not the same as expending money for infrastructure. And our current structure has significantly constrained the ability to use funds collected to deliver this infrastructure to the people that live and work in our city. Under BuildBettersD, existing funding already collected is required to stay in separate funds to be used in the specified community. However, with a new citywide funding source, we can begin to use those $220 million sitting in our accounts by adding to those pots of money. A citywide funding model also allows the city to comprehensively and holistically provide an infrastructure system that meets all our needs, regardless of oftentimes arbitrary community boundary lines. As of date, there's as little as $500,000 available funding in some communities, shown by the light purple on this map, and over $45 million available funding in some other communities. Despite a total fund balance of over $220 million, these funds are essentially locked up. On paper, they're available, but not in reality. BuildBetterSD will allow the expenditure of these funds so that we can do what we are meant to be doing, spending funds rather than collecting them in accounts, which serves no one. Similar to the Parks for All of Us initiative, which was adopted by City Council last summer, BuildBetterSD proposes citywide fees based on asset types of mobility, fire, and library. This will facilitate the collection of funds in unrestricted funding pots, help deliver infrastructure quicker, prioritize investment in areas where development is greater, in areas with the overall greatest need, and serve the greatest amount of people. So this brings us to our first action item. The public facilities, services, and safety element of the general plan provides policies on how we want to fund infrastructure and prioritize the infrastructure needed to serve our growing city. Our current policies are outdated and focus on the type of development patterns that we've seen in the past. Since our climate action plan was adopted, most of our growth is in the urban core, in areas located closest to transit, and in the form of infill development. It is now time to update our infrastructure policies to reflect this shift in a manner that furthers our critical need for more affordable housing, and in a way that focuses on delivering infrastructure to the people that live in our city that need it the most. We're proposing to update goals and policies to answer 3 important questions shown on this screen. What kind of public spaces and infrastructure do we need for the people of San Diego? 2, how can we sustainably fund the needed public spaces and infrastructure? And 3, how do we prioritize infrastructure in areas with the greatest growth and greatest need? As part of the general plan amendment, we have been conducting outreach to get feedback from community organizers and residents, and also engaging with high school students who these investments will affect in our future. So far, we have heard some great feedback, including that people don't want their neighborhoods to be overlooked. They want local merchants, comfortable streets to walk, accessible, connected public spaces that are safe, clean, and activated by family-friendly events. In addition to this, a survey is available on the BuildBetterSD webpage in both Spanish and in English to get a better idea of how people view public spaces in their community and get a better sense of what San Diegans want to see in the long term. So far, we have heard from over 200 people, and we want to hear from more. We want to hear from you. This specific slide shows feedback we have received through the survey. For example, when asked how the city can create public spaces and buildings that are safe and accessible to people of all age groups and abilities, respondents selected safe intersections and well-lit paths as top options. BuildBetterSD can provide the flexibility needed to use the development impact fee funds to fund exactly these type of improvements that we're hearing we want to see. The next slide shows that when asked if the quality and quantity of public spaces and buildings are about the same in neighborhoods across San Diego, over 60% of respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed which speaks to there being endless and ongoing opportunities to improve our current system. And as a final example, when asked how we can make spaces more enjoyable, respondents wanted to see spaces activated by people participating in sports and in community events, meaning we want to foster spaces that create these opportunities across the city. These preliminary responses show that our city needs are changing, and BuildBetterSD is intended to provide this flexibility to be able to receive continuous and ongoing community feedback on how we can best invest to serve our city. So again, I want to point out the survey is still open and will be available on the BuildBetterSD webpage until the end of this month. And we want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to take the survey. In addition, all draft documents related to this initiative have also been posted online, and you're invited to review and provide feedback. The project team really wants to hear from you. The input that we gather will help further shape this initiative and how we continue to engage with you as we move forward with implementation. And we want to continue to hear again from you. I cannot emphasize this enough. So we still have more to share with you about this initiative. So our team's going to share links and review how you can continue to provide feedback a little bit later at the end of this presentation. So the second action item of BuildBetterSD is reforming the Regional Transportation Congestion Improvement Program, which is abbreviated as RTCIP. Currently, we have a standard flat fee for single family and multifamily units to support this program. We're proposing a more dynamic program similar to other proposed citywide fees. Proposed RTCIP fees are scaled based on unit size to ensure that developments pay their proportionate share to fund regionally serving mobility and active transportation projects. To complement these efforts, the program will be updated to implement policies that prioritize biking, walking, rolling, and transit that aligns with the city's climate action goals. The current development impact fee greatly differs from one community to another. The map on this slide shows how largely the fees vary in the city. To give you an example, the development impact fee for a single-family residential unit currently ranges from as little as $2,000 to as much as $135,000 per unit across the city. Communities with very low fees generally means there is less money to invest in needed infrastructure, and communities with very high fees is a disincentive to affordable and fair housing opportunities located primarily in the city's highest resource areas. So moving to a citywide fee will allow for more consistency and predictability. The same fee will apply to all communities, meaning the fee will increase for some communities to provide for the necessary infrastructure needed, and it will decrease in other areas. Right now, there are some communities, to give you an example, for Torrey Highlands, where the fee is over $135,000 per unit. And these high fee amounts make it challenging, you can even say impossible, to achieve fair housing. To bring us to our third action item, as part of BuildBetterSD, development impact fees will be restructured from community-based to citywide-based to a citywide, So as part of BuildBetterSD, development impact fees will be restructured from community-based fees to citywide fees based on asset type, mobility, fire, and libraries. This is a direct follow-up to the citywide park development impact fee adopted last year by City Council. As mentioned earlier, currently there are combined $220 million in unspent funds because each community does not have enough money to fund its own existing planned projects. These existing funds will not be folded into the citywide funds. They will be spent on the projects for which they were collected in accordance with the existing public facilities financing plans. Once BuildBetterSD is approved and adopted, the new citywide fees will be available for citywide funding structure, and projects will be prioritized in areas with the greatest need and in areas experiencing growth, as development impact fees are collected to offset infrastructure needs arising due to that growth and new development. The city has developed a draft development impact fee calculator, which you can find on our BuildBetterSD webpage. The calculator is going to give you a breakdown of the proposed diff by asset type, as well as the current development impact fees. Please note that this is a preliminary version of the calculator designed to share information about potential ranges of fees and does not include discounts for mobility, fire, and library fees that are proposed as part of BuildBetterSD. Your feedback on the fee amounts and any potential policy goals that could be addressed through the final fee amounts is welcomed and appreciated. So please, again, send us your feedback. So the fourth and final item is that in conjunction, the San Diego Municipal Code will be amended to implement BuildBetterSD policies to again streamline the delivery of more infrastructure to more people much sooner. The draft BuildBetterSD code amendment package is also posted on the website. The planning department has held workshops throughout the city to share information about BuildBetterSD and gather input about policies that will help people feel safe, connected, and happy in our public spaces. Following this workshop, this initiative will be heard at Planning Commission on March 24th, followed by Council Committee and City Council anticipated later this spring in the months of April and May. The Planning Department, again, wants to hear from you. Public input is collected and considered as this item makes its way to City Council. The City Council will ultimately review and vote on this item. To review draft documents related to this initiative, please visit the Build Better webpage. The URL is provided on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. So the first action is to send us your comments or share ideas by emailing the project team at publicspaces@sandiego.gov, also shown on the bottom right. Another way you can provide input is by taking a moment to complete the survey, which can also be found on the BuildBetterSD webpage and is available in both Spanish and English. And finally, you can also sign up to get updates and notifications about this initiative on the BuildBetterSD webpage. We'll be dropping the links to the webpage and survey in the chat here shortly. This concludes our presentation. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. I'm going to hand it over back to Christian, who will walk us through the question and answer portion of this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Hello, everyone. It's me again. Thank you for the lively comments that we have been following in the chat and the Q&A. As a reminder, please place your comments or questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Corey, I think we have some lined up and queued up. So do you want to start those for us?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and start in the Q&A box, and then I'll move over to the chat, and I'm going to go back and forth. So the first question that we had in the Q&A box is from Linda Case, and she was wondering who she needs to talk to about making a path from Adams to 805 down the hill on the Caltrans property that would eventually go over the bridge of Mission Parkway back to Fenton Bridge. For a park into the river trail.
I can take that question. I know a lot of you have specific infrastructure requests, and it can often be frustrating to find out, what the best pathway is to advocate for that. We welcome you to follow up with our team so that we can help you advocate through the city for specific projects. And the email address, best way to contact our team, was located on the page. And Paula, can you remind everybody what that email address is, please?
Yeah, publicspaces@sandiego.gov, and we'll be dropping that in the chat, just
Yep.
to let everyone know.
And so I'm going to move over to the chat now, and like I said, I'm going to do one in Q&A, one in the chat. Pamela asks, can you give examples of what infrastructure needs are not tied directly to new development?
Yeah, development impact fees can be very complicated and difficult to understand. One important thing to understand is that they are intended to be able to provide the infrastructure that is attributable to the burden imposed by the new development project. There are plenty of projects that can be attributable to new development projects, but there are also other infrastructure needs throughout the city that exist today. So even if we didn't have any new development in our city, we would still have infrastructure needs. And so that is basically the distinction between those two types. But as we all know, infrastructure that serves new development can also serve existing development, and infrastructure that serves existing development also serves new development as well.
Okay, moving back over to the Q&A box, KTUA Planner is asking, would the city consider other funding streams outside of our tax base to fulfill the full potential of a public project? As they mentioned in the chat, there are state grants available for parks, but an urban public plaza could fulfill the necessary requirements for these grants.
Excellent question and excellent point. Development impact fees are a way for us to fund infrastructure within our city, but they are certainly not the only way. And a lot of the projects that community members want to see in their communities are perfect examples of projects that are very competitive for grant funding. So while we do talk about different ways that we can prioritize investments for infrastructure projects, we also are constantly looking for other funding opportunities as well, specifically through the types of grant funding opportunities that you've identified.
All right, so heading back to the chat, Sally asks, with old DIF staying in their original community, how are you still able to meet the needs of communities of concern at the level they still need for equity?
So for the fees that we've already collected that retain their space in the different communities, that's not a policy decision that we're able to make because they're legally required to stay to be used for that purpose. However, moving forward with a citywide funding structure, it does give us the flexibility to be able to prioritize those investments in the areas of the greatest needs. Each of the communities throughout our city does have some level of funding from development impact fees, and a citywide funding stream is something that can be used to be able to top off those buckets of money to be able to bring more infrastructure into communities that have historically been underserved. As I had mentioned also before, we also are looking for grant funding all the time to be able to identify and partner with the communities as well to be able to deliver infrastructure, even when there's not an immediate availability of the development impact fee funds.
Okay, so moving back to the Q&A, this is a long question and it is a two-part question. So I'm going to read it, paraphrase a little bit, and then read the two parts. The first part is, what data were used to define communities with greatest needs, which are highlighted in the story map? I would expect that for each of the type of infrastructures, parks versus libraries versus public streets versus pedestrians, and et cetera, for the communities of concern would change. At least the rank of order would change. And then the second part of that question is, will that data and those formulas be made public? Your fact sheets talk about addressing historical investment in equities. How will they be quantified, and what part will they play in the city creating for fair and consistent application of this new proposed program? And who will be responsible for it? So technically it's actually a three-part question.
let me do my best to answer that. It's a very excellent question. In terms of prioritization, first of all, we have identified areas there's lots of ways to identify areas with infrastructure deficiencies and greatest needs. One of the ways that we can do that is by taking inventories and looking at the availability of the infrastructure. We also identify through our climate equity index areas that have relatively low, very low and moderate access to opportunity. That's all information that we can share with everybody as well. In terms of policies going forward, we do hope that everybody will be taking a look at the proposed amendments to the public facilities element of the general plan to help us refine those policies to identify the areas with the greatest needs. We also want to make sure that we are making infrastructure investments where they make sense, where they serve the most people, where the most people are likely to benefit from them, and where the area and in the communities that have the greatest needs due to a lack of infrastructure.
Okay, and then going back to the chat, Robert Hill is asking, and I think what he is asking is about the fees and would they go to unpopular needs like storm drains?
Separately, the Stormwater Department is working on a stormwater funding strategy. And so I wouldn't say that we all think they're unpopular. They are very critical infrastructure assets, but we do anticipate that those will be primarily addressed through a separate stormwater funding strategy. So this particular initiative, BuildBetterSD, as Powell had mentioned, we've already moved to citywide park development impact fees, and this continues that effort from mobility assets, fire stations, as well as libraries.
Okay. So Renee Smith is asking that given the repeated emphasis on the importance of infrastructure, she's never really understood why there are master plans, mobility, housing, parks, all these different plans. And she refers to it as what was originally viewed as a four-legged stool has become a three-legged stool. And she is wondering, what the plan is to integrate all the aspects of the infrastructure.
Yeah, capital improvement infrastructure investments are very complicated. I would like to offer to the commenter to please contact our staff so that we can provide a sort of more comprehensive overview and point you in the direction of resources towards the city's capital improvement process. But we're definitely happy to follow up with you.
So I'm just going through the chat again. There are lots and lots of questions. I should note that we won't be able to get through all the questions today, just given that there's so many, and I am very thankful and appreciate all the questions and comments. But you can go to the website, which I'll drop in the chat again, and you can take the survey and submit comments via the website.
We can also, I just want to offer this too, for any of the questions we don't get to in the chat, we can download that chat and we can try and find each of the commenters based on your name and provide responses to you, or please email our team and we will respond to your questions at that time.
Okay, so Jeffrey Stevens is asking, what is the new fee being proposed? And then does it vary by housing type, commercial and business acreage?
Great question. We hope that you will take the opportunity to look at what we think is a pretty nifty calculator that's available on our webpage, where you can put in different attributes for different types of projects based on housing size, each different level of square footage. So in general, smaller units have less people and then therefore have less infrastructure needs than larger units that tend to house more people. So they are scaled by housing type and size. And then also same for industrial and commercial have different fee rates as well. The calculator does show a comparison between existing community-based fees as well as what the proposed fees are for the new citywide fee. Again, I want to emphasize that we are looking for public input on the appropriate fee amounts. These are based on the maximum that the city can legally charge as determined through what's called a nexus study. and also taking feedback on other ways that we can use our development impact fee program to incentivize certain types of development.
This is a great follow-up question to the point you just made. Are there any draft fee schedules of these changes aside from the calculator? It is not easy to determine what unit sizes are charged for what fee.
Yeah, we can provide some summaries, and that's a great point. We will work to put those and add those to our webpage. But overall, it's not as simple as just looking at a particular type of fee, because we have moved to the type of fee system where our fees are scaled, essentially right sizing the type. It's not really a straight apples to apples comparison of the existing fees, which are a one size fits all approach. Samira, do you have anything else to add?
I think that's good.
So I'm just going back to the chat. Okay, so Joanne Selleck is asking, assuming the Build Better SD is adopted, how would citywide equitable decisions on the use of the money be made and by whom? Would it be the community panel, city council? And would there be a review of those decisions? And what will they be?
Yeah, ultimately, with all city funds, ultimate decisions are made by the city council through the city's budget process. So each year the city adopts a budget operationally, but also adopts a capital improvement program budget as well. And those are the places where the decisions are made in practice on which projects will be funded, not just through development impact fees, but through a variety of funding sources as well.
So Dana Gibbett in the Q&A asked, the city is not collecting any RTCIP fees on ADUs. If we have such a deficit on infrastructure money, why are we waiving RTCIP fees on all ADUs? Why didn't the city reinstate those fees as part of the housing action package that was just passed?
Thank you for the question. We are evaluating through this program also an update to the RTCIP program, which includes what the allowable exemptions are. We are also constrained by the exemptions that are provided for by our regional planning agency partners, but definitely looking forward to additional feedback on our RTCIP funding program as well.
And Oscar Jones in the chat has just a logistical question. Will we be able to access a recording of this workshop after the workshop is complete?
We will be placing a recorded copy of this session on our webpage.
Okay. This was an anonymous question in the Q&A, but what measures will be put in place to avoid displacement of residents in areas that are receiving infrastructure improvements?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so what measures will be put in place to avoid displacement of residents in areas that are receiving infrastructure improvements?
Yeah, so we definitely, this is one package. We also have a lot of other initiatives going on in the planning department, including addressing and putting in place anti-displacement regulations as well. So feel free to reach out to this team, and we can also connect with our housing team we have in the planning department as well.
So I have a few comments in the chat that I just want to read out so that we capture those too. Rachel Graham, it says, also very excited to see more equitable investment throughout the city. It sounds like this has the potential to bring about real change and benefit for those who need it most. Oscar wrote, Paula did a great job at presenting. She did. I love the diversity in this panel. You guys are amazing, and thank you for all your hard work. You're making the city better. And V. Coos Baker wrote, I am cautiously hopeful that the Build Better program can bring safer, faster, and more accessible public transportations and safer streets to SD. So I'm going to move back over to the Q&A and just find a question here, and then I'll move back to the chat. So this was an anonymous question as well, but the person wrote, how will the city maintain conversations with the community about these issues once the plan is implemented?
I'm very pleased to have Paola on our team, as well as the rest of our public spaces team is joining us as well. We have a dedicated team of members that you can always be reaching out to. We definitely need to, through our planning processes, continually have input from the community so that we can be planning and advocating for infrastructure that actually is going to be used, valued, and enjoyed by each of you that live within our city. So this team that you see before us are dedicated infrastructure planners that are assigned to the communities throughout the city.
So moving to the chat, Lorna Zukas is asking, how are you planning to make sure that those who want peaceful neighborhoods without every block being packed with businesses and people still have access to them?
I apologize that my internet is cutting out, so I missed that question. Could you please repeat it?
Yeah, no problem. So Lorna asked, how are you planning to make sure that those who want peaceful neighborhoods without every block being packed with businesses and people still have access to them?
Yeah, public spaces are, something to be enjoyed, but also something to be managed. And when we talk about providing for opportunities for thriving public spaces, we want to make sure those are safe and enjoyable. Part of doing so is for planning for adequate public spaces in general. And really what this initiative is about is being able to equitably and efficiently be able to deliver those infrastructure assets.
So there's two questions in the Q&A, and then I'm going to move back to the chat because I think they're somewhat related. So another anonymous attendee asked, when will the amendments be accepted? Or I think they're referring to the Buildbettersd.
As Paola had explained on the presentation, which we'll also be posting onto our webpage as well, the item is going to be heard at the City of San Diego's Planning Commission on March 24th, and then it will be going forward to City Council Committee, as well as the City Council later this spring. So if they went into effect after consideration by the City Council, we could expect to see these changes in effect by later this summer.
And then Chris wrote, what is the status of unused FBA funds, which have had all of their projects funded but need to stay in the area?
Yeah, that's a question that's really specific to each particular community. But in general, as I had stated before, the funds that have already been collected will continue to stay in those community funds and be used for the projects for which they were identified, with the added benefit of having a new citywide funding stream that can be used to supplement the funds in each of the existing communities.
So moving back to the chat, if adopted, when would this go into effect? And would there be a tiered adoption?
Yeah, so if adopted, the initiative wouldn't go into effect later this summer. There is the issue of when new fees would actually have an effective date. And that's something that we're looking for community feedback on of an appropriate phase in for the new development impact fees.
I'm just reading some of the questions here. Let me go back to the Q&A real quick. So Renee Smith is asking, there was significant discussion during the Parks Master Plan development, especially focusing on the implementation plans. The final product was much improved. How does your plan Buildbettersd written documentation specifically address implementation?
Yeah, so the Parks for All of Us initiative did come with a very comprehensive Parks Master Plan. For this particular item, these different types of assets, mobility, libraries, and fire stations, the library department is currently working on a library master plan. And we've also communicated with our sister departments in the fire department, as well as the transportation and mobility departments, to be able to incorporate as much as we can into the policies within the general plan public facilities element.
Great. And so Pat in the Q&A asks, and also makes a comment, almost every week, there are thousands and thousands of payouts to victims of our public sidewalks. When will those sidewalks that are in terrible disrepair from people and people getting hurt, sorry, I totally misread this. Why are they not getting repaired or replaced?
We can separately discuss specific projects. As I had said, this initiative doesn't identify particular projects to be funded, but really is looking to transform how we look at development impact fees in general, and how we prioritize infrastructure investments throughout the city.
Hey, Corey, I'm going to chime in with someone who had their hand raised.
Oh.
How will other capital improvement plans such as Blueprint SD and Mobility Action Plan be aligned with this initiative?
Yeah, so this planning department also has an initiative called Blueprint SD, which if there's any questions about that, please contact our team on that as well. The mobility department, the sustainability and mobility department is also working toward a mobility action plan that will be building off of Build Better SD. But this particular initiative does set a very important framework to update and modernize, as I had said before, our policies that have become quite outdated, to be able to prioritize investments in the areas with the greatest needs that serve the most people and that align with our climate goals as well.
So in the Q&A, and I noted this in the chat too, I'm going to try to group things into themes now since we are starting to run out of time. But there's been a lot of questions about parking and comments about parking. So V. Koosbaker wrote, what about safe parking locations for those that that live without cars?
Yeah, again, as I had mentioned, for the particular projects, we're happy to follow up with you. But on this particular initiative, again, we're not identifying specific projects to be constructed.
I'm just reviewing the chat. There's a lot of really great questions and comments in here. Let me move over here real quick. Oh, here's another question. How many funds will how much will the funds of with this new initiative be created? That's the calculator that you were referring to, I think, earlier.
Yeah, so the funds that will be collected are based on new development. So as we see new development projects come forward, a particular development impact fee will be applied to the development project and go into the citywide fund. One of the main goals of Build Better SD is for us to not just collect funds, but for us to expend funds. And so with a new citywide funding model, the idea is for us to, as Paula had mentioned, rather than sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure funds that really could go into serving our communities today, we would be collecting those funds and have the flexibility to be able to turn around and actually provide infrastructure to our residents and visitors in our city.
There's been several questions and comments in the chat about bike facilities. And I just want to highlight this comment from Oscar that says we need to build safe, separate bike lanes where more feel comfortable by riding by themselves. San Diego likes to drive, and that is referring to some of the comments made earlier in the chat. But we need to prioritize human beings and not cars. So they would like to know how the diffs would support more safe biking infrastructure.
I can take that one. That's a great comment. And as part of this initiative, we are amending the general plan and we are updating the policies. And we're also amending the RTCIP program to allow for more active transportation uses. And that is the intent behind all of this, to allow for more infrastructure, to allow for walking, biking, rolling. And we're happy to take more comments. All these documents have been published online. We're happy to take more comments and feedback so we can make these documents better as we take them through the public hearing process.
So there's also a comment/question about ADA parking. And so how would these funds support ADA parking?
Another great question. And anything related to ADA bikes is all part of the mobility nexus study, and that is the mobility fee that we are proposing. And we will be posting the draft nexus study online very shortly here, and that does identify. And our mobility fee study is a plan-based study, so that does identify all the infrastructure that we're proposing as part of that. And please take time to review the document and provide us feedback as we evolve these documents and bring this initiative forward through the hearing process.
Hey, Samir, there's a follow-up to that. So there's a comment about seniors needing accessible parking, not necessarily ADA parking. Just something that's accessible, just a place for them to park and for all of their errands that doesn't fall under ADA. Could you add on to that?
I'll just chime in here. We do have an ADA accessibility coordinator that works in our sustainability and mobility department. So for specific questions related to that, if you want to get in contact with our team, we can definitely put this commenter in touch with the right department.
Another logistical question, how will these funds be managed and who will they be managed by?
Funds are managed by the planning department from a very operational standpoint, but that is in coordination with all of the asset owning departments that will be actually taking care of these assets once they're delivered. We also work closely with our engineering capital projects department, which is a public works department, to be able to use our funding to provide them the ability to deliver the infrastructure. And then again, everything is in coordination through our budget process to specifically identify the particular projects to be funded with the funds that we manage.
So Helen noted a comment about that the climate action seems to contradict some of the city plans, and assumes that if you build it and build it more, that they will come. They also note that 8% of people who bike do not reflect the needs of us many old, young, and the infirm. So could you talk a little bit about how the Build Better SD would support climate action, but also do it in an equitable way? I think this is referring to there was several comments earlier in the chat about how, San Diego loves to drive. And so we don't necessarily want to, kick all the drivers out.
Yeah, so the types of funding infrastructure that these funds are for all mobility assets. They include infrastructure for all modes of travel. What we are doing, though, is aligning our policies to come into alignment with our climate action plan to make sure that we have safe and enjoyable streets for all users.
Thank you for that. I have one other one for you, Heidi or Samira. It was originally rumored that there was a split between local areas and citywide funds for DIPS. What is the status of this?
Repeat that question, Christian. Sorry.
Sure. It was originally rumored that there would be a split between local areas and the citywide funds for DIPS. What is the status of this?
So I think we currently have community-specific fees, and with this initiative, we are proposing to shift to a citywide fees. I hope that answers the question. Otherwise, we're happy to connect offline, please feel free to email us at publicspaces@sandiego.gov, and we're happy to answer any questions.
And just to follow up on what Samira said, I just recopied and pasted some links that Paula had provided earlier in the chat so that you can see it more recently. And I also copied the website for the Build Better SD in the chat too. We have another question. It says, I know you all said that your outreach for this initiative includes students. Could you expand on what other stakeholders you've reached out to, specifically communities of concern?
I can start, and Heidi, feel free to add to that. We have been working with 3 different high schools, and we've conducted 3 different intergenerational workshops at City Heights, San Ysidro. So we had workshops at Hoover, Morris, and San Ysidro, and we had intergenerational workshops at Ocean Discovery Institute, San Ysidro Library, and Skyline Library. And we had not only high schoolers, but different age groups participating in these workshops and providing feedback to develop the policies and goals of the general plans public facilities element, which is, again, the draft is being posted online. And we're still, the outreach is an ongoing process, and we're happy to receive any feedback on the policies and goals drafted and all the other documents that have been posted online, and incorporate the comments and feedback as we develop the initiative and take it through the hearing process.
So I just did a look through the chat and also through the Q&A, and I think we've hit a lot of the questions, but I did find one that is that touches on coastal communities. So I think it's Brandon that wrote, could you please confirm that the funds acquired through the development in coastal communities such as La Jolla can be used in infrastructure at more central communities such as Lemon Grove?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a conversation that maybe it would be helpful if you contacted our team so we could discuss that a little bit more. But in general, these are citywide fees that are focused on use within the city and determining the appropriate areas to be able to prioritize investments.
I think with that, we've touched upon most of the questions. We invite everyone to, if your question didn't get answered, you'd like further clarification or like to ask more questions, please email us or contact us at the various links that Corey and the team have provided in the chat. Heidi, Samira, Paula, if there's any closing comments that you would like to leave us with this evening, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody that has spent their time with us. I know it's a busy evening and a lot of us have our kids running around in the background. So thank you to everybody for taking your time. We hope that you will go to our webpage, learn more about this particular initiative. And with a lot of the things that are going on, this stuff is not easy, it's complicated. And so if you have any questions or need a little bit more time to be able to understand it, we want to be there to be able to help you so that you can provide input so that we can make this initiative really be something that works best for everybody that lives in our city. So please look at our webpage and continue to interact with us and share your comments and questions and thoughts with us. Thank you so much.
Paula, did you add anything, Samira?
Sure. Reiterating exactly what Heidi said, outreach is an ongoing process. We're always available to have a conversation and answer your questions. So please feel free to reach out through email, through providing comments on all the documents that have been posted. Our survey is still online. Please take a minute to provide your feedback and reach out to us so that we can answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And I do want to take a moment to give a plug that on our webpage on the right-hand side, you can choose the language that you would like to see displayed, so you can select to see the entire webpage in Spanish. In addition, we really have made a big effort to make all of our materials available in both Spanish and in English. This is an ongoing effort. We're not perfect, but please, if you can, share that with as many community members as possible. We do want to create as much of an inclusive process as possible. Again, speaking to what Heidi and Samira have already said. But just, as a Spanish speaker, I wanted to put in that plug because we've been working very hard on that. So thank you everyone for joining. And that's all I have to say as my closing remarks.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We know it's late, but we appreciate you hanging with us, and your comments are very valuable to us. Please continue to reach out to us through the many different ways and language of choice through our many links. We thank you again for joining us tonight. And with that, have a good evening.